Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. Obviously, a huge thank you to Abu Dhabi and the ADGM for putting on another fantastic Abu Dhabi Finance Week. And thank you to our panelists. Just to kick off, to give you a bit of an explainer what we'll cover today, I think we've all seen the rapid ascent of the UAE as a global hub for digital finance and fintech innovation. Obviously, with multinationals coming into the region, coming to new markets involves factoring new challenges and aligning marketing one's business with kind of local interests. So to help us dive into this subject, we're joined by Dave King, Rachel Conlon. To kick off, Dave, do you want to just share a bit about yourself and Digitalis, and then Rachel to follow?
Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Darius, and thanks to ADGM. I'm Dave King, Chief Executive and Founder of Digitalis. We're a technology business, but we're an online intelligence, investigations, and reputation platform. We help governments and large corporations not only with market entry, as we're talking about today, but also in other situations where people come under scrutiny internationally.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Conlon. I'm the Global Chief Marketing Officer of Binance. For those that don't know, we're the largest global exchange, not just by trading volume, but by users. We just hit the milestone of 300 million users earlier this week. And I'm particularly excited to be here in Abu Dhabi Finance Week, my personal home and now my professional home, as earlier this week, we had a very significant milestone by becoming the first globally registered and licensed exchange by the ADGM and FRSA. So it's particularly poignant to be here this week.
Well, congratulations and thank you again.
Thank you.
As you said, 300 million users. As Binance being an already very well-established business in a well-established, much hype asset class, can you talk us through what multinationals that are well-established in their own domestic market, when they're looking at entering new markets, how should CEOs and CMOs think about maintaining the kind of brand equity of their own business and their brand, but whilst also aligning with local nuances and local strategic priorities as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. Binance started its journey 8 years ago and has taken a very local market approach to how we built our business, very community first. In fact, we kind of pride ourselves on that positioning of being the world's largest local exchange in how we operate. But the playbook that was in the beginning is one that we still focus on, and I think there's 4 core principles to that. Firstly, from a marketing and from a business perspective, it's critical that you really understand the reality and the relationship that those users in that local market have between finance and trust, and understand their passions, what is it that drives them, their motivations, the economic realities in which they're living, West versus East, emerging versus established. And that's a big focus for us. The use cases in a market that we recently have really doubled down on, Peru, which we're seeing crypto being used for payments, versus a Turkish market, which is one of the top 3 globally with the highest penetration, where crypto was being used again as a hedge against inflation, versus the reality of UAE, where it's being used for wealth and for payments, and runs the gamut for remittances. So for us, it's really about understanding that local user, their local situation. I think second of all, and I can't stress this enough, it's understanding that as you enter in a market, you're working with the right stakeholders that are going to be able to support your business. You need that partnership. That's critical. And for us, we take a very regulator-first approach. Richard Tang earlier on was here and set up the ADGM, and over the last 2 years has worked diligently, to support that. But above all, I think working not just with the regulators, but also working with the education academies, the associations, understanding how do you build what is a global brand business, but within that local ecosystem. And I think last of all, we're a retail business. We have a strong institutional offering, but we're a retail business, so you have to focus on education. And that education needs to take many forms, whether it's simple education, digital AMAs on Twitter, which is one that we are big fans of, or weeks like this, where we're sitting with a lot of the traditional institutions that are starting their journey into this space and educating and offering our support in terms of how to enter into it in the right way.
It's interesting in that explanation, you talk a lot about kind of building understanding and local nuance. And I just coming to you, Dave, on that. Obviously, building that understanding requires intelligence. And so, Digitalis was built 15, 16 years ago as a tech-native, tech-driven firm. So from your vantage point, how can companies actually equip themselves with the right tools to get a real cogent understanding of what those market dynamics look like?
Well, I was worried for a minute you were going to credit me with intelligence.
I'll credit Digitalis.
But I think Rachel touches on a few of the key challenges. From our perspective, I think the macro misconception is that a brand can transfer seamlessly into a new market. And we often see organizations getting the legal compliance right, but underweighting the digital risks. Obviously, local stakeholder groups are different, and they're all influenced through online research channels. Values are obviously different. Consider the Western organization moving into new markets, looking to port the values of privacy or freedom of speech or transparency, which can often be seen in a different market as foreign interference. Also, social media sentiment doesn't travel well. If you think Huawei's global expansion versus the geopolitical anxieties of the West, and what the social media narrative played out as was espionage. Think about a French company investing in Africa, an American tech company moving into Asia. The political challenges are cumbersome. So it's critical to understand local nuance. And to do that, you need deep, full research. You need to understand and curate the online profile of your business as it's researched by third parties on the ground. And then in terms of due diligence and intelligence gathering, there's an important note, which is that in every country, the key channels, the key platforms through which to find that intelligence differ. So it's key to have local experts in any new territory.
I was just going to say, jumping back to you, Rachel, it's interesting when you were talking about, we've all seen the kind of demonstrable efforts Binance has made in educating the market and cultivating and building the ecosystem locally. That to me boils down to delivery of in-country value. And I think that's something that a lot of foreign entrants sometimes overlook or underestimate. So you can, from your personal journey and Binance's journey, can you give a bit of color on what it really means to provide in-country value and just how critical that is to a successful entry into a new market?
Yeah. Look, I think it's a really good point. I think what we do is, and we talk a lot about the idea of being hyper-local within the marketing team, within the product team, within the business. So everything from your first interaction with us, whether that be on social media, to what your experience when you enter into our platform, we ensure that we are localizing that and meeting people where they are in their journey. And I think that's critical because if we look at not just digital asset financial literacy, if we look at financial literacy more broadly, we're dealing with vastly diverse markets that we're operating in, especially as you look at Africa, you look at Latin America, you look at South Asia. And what we need to do is ensure that we're arming those users with the right information. Our founders had the ingenious idea, I wish it was mine, but I'll claim it now, 5 years ago of launching Binance Academy. And Binance Academy, think about it like a masterclass platform, if people are familiar with that, where they understood that people had lots of questions and the world of digital assets was a big myth, and where they were finding their information may not necessarily be correct or valid. So this is an online masterclass where there's over 10,000 modules where you can educate yourself on everything from what is Bitcoin, or who is Satoshi, as many people ask still, to more, as you go deeper into that journey, more fundamental, going into fundamental trading strategies and the like. And just to give context, we had 43 million people participate on that platform. It's localized in 33 languages. I think we're adding another 30, over this 6-month period. And 43 million people, 400,000 people alone in Kenya use that platform over the last 24 months. And the reason why the importance of meeting people where they are, it's like tailoring the content, tailoring the tools, tailoring the products to ensure you're showing up in a relevant way, because that's how you're building meaningful trust. We're also big believers in helping people understand how to enter into the place into crypto, and starting their digital asset journey in a safe and secure way. So as they go onto our platform, if we see someone entering into a tool like futures that will be too complicated for them, we have extra layers of protection that users have to complete questionnaires before we'll unlock that tool. So it's educating users, empowering them with the right information, but also continuing to manage them while they're on that journey.
It's interesting. You touch on building trust, and we'll get to that in a minute. But what you've shared, I guess, is a really great primer on proactively how to kind of build trust and credibility and buy-in. Alongside the proactivity, I guess there's a need to preemptively also mitigate risk when entering new markets. And I think for a lot of institutions, especially in this sector, there may be unknown risks in new markets that leadership might not be aware of through not having been in the region or specific market they're entering. So Dave, from your perspective and from the work that Digitalis is doing in this space, how can organizations equip themselves internally or with providers like yourselves to know the unknown risks they need to consider?
No, sure. Well, and I'll try and focus on the CMO role in that context, I suppose, because, of course, probably elsewhere in the organization, the GC or the CFO is worrying about due diligence on partners and all kinds of things. Whereas we think the CMO has to has to perform as a market intelligence hub, and historic and real-time social media strategic intelligence is fundamental to that, in terms of understanding the trending narratives, understanding misinformation that might be out there, understanding who are the influencers, where are the activists, what is the local sentiment, And the same sources provide for reputational due diligence on prospective partners as well. And that's the way we understand risk to be able to mitigate it. And I think that intelligence to the CMO has to precede and inform all of the deliverables, partnering with regulators, partnering with industry associations, over compliance, hopefully in advance of launch, localization of case studies, crisis comms playbooks, et cetera, and tracking social media on an ongoing basis allows you then to adapt messaging on the fly in market to react to all of those counter pressures.
Yeah, the first thing I do in the morning is, before I even have coffee, is check X, LinkedIn, Instagram to understand what narratives are being socialized. Hopefully they're positive. A large amount of time they can be negative. And you have to be able to use that social media sentiment as a way to check the pulse of how you need to adapt your strategies. It used to be on a week-on-week or month-on-month or quarter-on-quarter. We're now operating in an hour-on-hour, in our industry. And I think that's increasingly affecting the traditional world as well.
It's interesting. You obviously, Rachel, you touched on building trust, and Dave, you just spoke about kind of reputational due diligence. Often we tend to talk about that at an organizational level, right? But obviously, CEOs and business leaders, especially around the fintech space and digital assets, are the custodians of those organizations. So I guess, Dave, staying with you, how should organizations really assess and determine if a board or business leader is market ready?
I guess from my perspective, market readiness of an executive, a board, of anyone really it's not about internal deliberations. It's more about observable characteristics from the outside in, and market readiness in that sense is, if you think, where do our target stakeholders look into us, before a meeting, before writing? Journalists, competitors, customers, partners, they all go online. And of course, that was traditionally on Google. Now they're using LLMs as well. So boards and leaders pre-market entry beyond the brand need to think about how we each look, And in order to do that, we need to audit the digital footprint. What is there out there about me that could cause a vulnerability in a new market? Once we've audited that digital footprint, we should think about how is all that content out there about our CEO, how is it ordered in different geographies? Because it's all very well to sit there in the US and think, well, it's all good. The Wall Street Journal profile is the first thing people see, and my Wikipedia page is great. But that might not be the case in the UAE, in Asia, in other markets. So how do we work on that? You know, we'll tend to think about these things with people like you, Rachel, 6 months before doing anything in a territory. And so curating the requisite profile of your key executives is fundamental, because it's they, as much as your brand, who will come under scrutiny, under cursory research, and what we do in advance will inform what people see.
I think this is a really interesting point. There's many markets that we don't operate in as a business, where we would love to in the medium to long term, but the journey starts now in terms of how you're showing up, how you're providing education to those stakeholders that may have questions. In our case, there's still a lot of misinformation, about centralized exchanges, about the broader ecosystem. So showing up and being the behind the scenes thought leader, as well as supporting them with data, supporting with insights, supporting them with education on how they can take a pioneering or a leading position. And I think here is the perfect example, UAE, of they started on that journey maybe 5 years ago, or even beyond, with some of the early holders here. And they've taken that time to work with the private sector to understand how they build. And the result is, what we see today, where you've got at Abu Dhabi Finance Week, this merging of digital assets and traditional finance, where I travel a lot, and I've never seen an event where you've got equal position of digital assets and
Yep.
of the traditional finance space.
It's interesting. You kind of preempted my next question. I'm just staying with you. In this space, especially, there's the desire for leaders to kind of demonstrate innovation and rapid growth, the kind of old school Silicon Valley move fast, break things, right? But through the lens of financial services, obviously, organizations have a fiduciary responsibility to do things right. So, from the perspective of Binance, how do you manage that kind of DeFi innovation, blue sky North Star messaging with kind of traditional TradFi responsible innovation?
Look, I think we need to remember it took 100 years to build the financial systems as we know it, and in just over a decade, we've seen similar systems being bought in digital assets. And I do think the traditional industry is now looking to companies like Binance and our broader ecosystem as the disruptors, that they're learning from how we create a modern financial system that caters for the way money needs to move in today's society, which needs to be faster. For me, I look at it fundamentally through one very simple principle. Our users, we need to keep our users safe. We're very privileged to be in the position of being the largest. We're trusted, and we are trusted because of what has been built. It's always like, how are we protecting our users? So whether that be through what I shared earlier on around education, or whether that be through how we mitigate risk in the user journey, through training people on how to protect themselves with 2FA authentication or risk protocols. That's really, really critical in order to ensure that we continue to build a system alongside. We're a companion now. And I think this week has been a true manifestation of that, where we're seeing the bridge between Web 2 and Web 3 is real. And together, it's not a conflict. Together, we're going to be able to build a financial system that caters for what is the modern user and what are the modern capital markets that we're facing.
Absolutely. And we've got about 30 seconds left. So just to wrap up, final question for each of you, bringing it close to home. We'll have all spoken to a number of aspiring companies looking to enter this thriving ecosystem we have in the UAE. Why the UAE for new market entrants? Dave, and then Rachel.
Well, I've recently moved to the UAE, and I'm moving increasing amounts of digitalized operation here. So I speak from a very personal perspective when I say there's so much energy in the UAE right now, and energy translates to business.
I moved to New York in 2008, directly after Lehman Brothers, and there was, I know, a negative time for traditional industry, but what was happening over there was this amazing surge of innovation, entrepreneurialism, and optimism in that direct aftermath. And I think, I moved here 4 years ago, and I haven't looked back. I think the energy you feel in this ecosystem, the welcome, the curiosity, the creativity, and really and I'm very biased as I'm based here, but we're truly seeing the future of finance being built in real time.
100%.
And for me, that's extraordinary. And I really commend the leaders of the UAE and Abu Dhabi on how they are doing that and welcoming the innovators and the traditional space in to work together and alongside together.
Couldn't agree more. Feel the same and echo both your sentiments. We are at time. Everybody, thank you very much for taking time to join us today. Dave, Rachel, thank you. And thank you again to the ADGM. Thanks a lot.